Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sauradeep Sarkar, your host for today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure welcoming you all to the live webinar on the theme of Build Your Infrastructure for Your Digital Business. This webinar is hosted by Cyber Media Research in association with IBM. For the duration of presentation, all participants' line will be on listen-only mode. During the course of presentation, if you have any questions, you may use the chat facility to send your questions to all panelists. And we'll try to take the questions during the Q&A session. And your feedback is very important for us, so kindly submit your feedback at the end of the webinar. I would like to now hand over the floor to Mr. Apulak Ghosh, who is a Principal Consultant from Emerging Technologies Research, Infotech Practice, Cyber Media, who will share his insights on digital transformation. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Ghosh.
Thanks for the warm introduction, and a very warm welcome to all our participants who have dialed in today from their respective organizations, homes, and offices for today's webinar. Right? As you can see, today we're going to discuss about a very, very important and pertinent topic that I guess everybody talks about a lot, is how do you build actually infrastructure for digital business. So my job here is to kind of set the plan for today's webinar, kind of set the context in terms of how we go about doing things and stuff like that, right? So typically when we talk about businesses in general, right, we hear a lot about digital transformation. But I guess when we talk about digital transformation, DT means different things to different people, right? Digital transformation for an organization like ours might have a different connotation. For a company like, say, in manufacturing, might have a different connotation. A company which is into IT, ITES might have a different connotation, right? However, the certain building blocks or a certain infrastructure requirement, probably there is a definite tectonic shift in terms of how we look at digital transformation, right? So in my next slide, I show you three organizations, and I'm sure everybody is aware of these three organizations. Uber, I guess, has been ubiquitous with travel, even in a country like ours, it is India, right? We commute day in and day out through Uber, right? Then you have Alibaba Group, which I'm sure you are aware. They're one of the largest, e-commerce players in the world globally. Probably if there's a competition to Amazon at a global level, it's Alibaba. And then you have Airbnb, which has their service rendered in India as well, and it's a massive success globally. They are in the space of, hotels and resorts and rooms accommodation. But there's something which is underpinning and underlying in all the three organizations. All the three organizations are very big in scale. They have global operations. Their revenues are running in billions of dollars, and very, very successful organizations to say the least. But what is the underlying theme of these organizations? I'm sure everybody would have answered, so let me share it here. Uber, no cars. Alibaba, no inventory. Airbnb, no real estate. Now, that's a digital transformation in the truest sense of the word, right? Imagine thinking about a car rental organization which did not own a single car on its own. Something which is unthinkable in the past has happened today. Imagine a situation like Alibaba, which does not own its own inventory, but it's supplying to billions of homes. Likewise, Airbnb does not own a single inventory of real estate, but has its hotels clustered around across the globe. So when we talk about digital transformation, the idea that I'm trying to project here is it's about the transformation in business on its core. And whenever I'm sure there's one particular term that we used to remember a lot in a business process, re-engineering or rethinking, there's a fundamental shift of how we look at our core businesses, our business goals, our business objectives, and our business model itself changes. So that is what digital transformation truly encompasses or envisages it to be, right? But having said so, in order to attain the digital transformation, there is something that we need to do. Let's understand what is it. So what is digital transformation? Obviously, there would be external factors which will have a significant impact when we uptake the digital transformation journey. There would be disruptive technologies such as, big data, IoT, so on and so forth, right? There would be, as I said, every industry's uptake on digital transformation or modernization will be different. However, at the individual level, it's up to your DNA and thinking how you take that journey forward, right? And also, it is on which cusp of this journey are you currently in, When we talk about digitization, it could be at an institutional level, it could be at an organizational level, it could be functional level. Also, in terms of how much digitization have you done internally, Are you a cloud-native organization which does everything inside out through cloud, or you've been more governed with the traditional modes of doing business, where automation is still looked at from a distance? So I think these things are a few metrics which have to be kept in mind when we look at digital transformation, right? So typically, the foundation pillars, if I may say, or the prerequisites of when we uptake or undertake a key journey of digital transformation is we need to understand and refocus on the business models that we have. There is a way we have done business so far, and there is a way that we want to do our business in the next future. The next 10 to 15 years is where I want to see my business growing. Are there newer avenues, are there new geographies, or is there a complete change of plan in terms of how I do my business altogether, right? And in order to support that, there is enterprise architecture which has to be changed, right? So there are new levels of architecture awareness, and as we see, and this is something that I'm sure as IT decision makers you hear day in, day out, is a refocused understanding of data management and how applications integrate, right? And as for a successful deployment of digital transformation, you need to have probably a more deeper and a clearer understanding of the product over the project view, right? And finally, but very importantly, I think for any successful deployment of digital transformation, what really works is the so-called culture or the DNA of the organization, how you work, what's the kind of mindset of people, and how you communicate with your people, the internal stakeholders or the external stakeholders. I think those are very important to take decisions at this scale, right? And when we ask about digital transformation, we have done a whole number of studies for a lot of organizations in the past and standard reports at Cybermedia Research. So when you ask a simple question like, do you want to undertake a digital transformation? A very large majority, and I'm quoting a number here, almost around 86 to 87% organizations give us a suggestion that they would want to go for digital transformation. But that instance when they are not sure where to begin. And the answer is definitely yes, I would want to undertake the journey. But how do I go about doing it, right? And there are a few questions, if they are answered in a structured way within the organization, I think that helps us taking the right approach. Who is leading this? I think it's very important. Who is leading this initiative? Obviously, it goes without saying, if the initiative has a runover through the CXOs, right? If your top management is duly involved in this change, I guess the approach becomes that much more easier, right? And the moment you do that, there is, as I said, every structural change in an organization needs to be organized, right? So every function of the organization is involved. So it does not work in silos. It has to be cooperative and cooperative, right? And somewhere down the line, while we focus internally, get the functionals, all the functions involved, we have to keep a deep focus on the customer always, right? And through this entire process of mapping our digital processes, our customer relationships, our digital products, services, business models, somewhere we need to opinionate how do I take my business model to the next level? How do I digitally transform myself? And kind of ponder about my existing business models to see if that's the best way forward. So in essence, what we're seeing is the 4 key imperatives that come out. So while yes, DT is something that we would like to do, it's something that is imperatively done, but the 4 pillars or boundaries, if I may say, is you've got to optimize your computing infrastructure, you've got to remove your IT complexity, and your go-to-market, the speed to market should be as quick as possible, right? And you definitely have to rely on your trusted partners to do all the above. And when we talk about optimizing our computing infrastructure, because I think that is somewhere which does not get spoken that often. So while DT is a fancy term and it's a term which actually gives you a lot of business focus and impetus, but in order to support this entire movement or journey, as I said, you need to have a very, very flexible, agile IT infrastructure to support this entire movement, right? So that's where the agility of the infrastructure comes in important. And as I said, it is the more I say, the lesser I speak of it, because the value of your incoming and outgoing data, at a core business strategy, is an important imperative for IT to be agile and flexible going forward, right? So agility and flexibility combined with data gives you a different dimension altogether. So as you all know, data has transformed itself in various capacities, be it in terms of type of data. Earlier we were receiving only structured data. Nowadays we have a lot of unstructured data coming from social media channels and so on and so forth. And needless to say, the volume and the velocity. I mean, we're talking about petabytes of data literally coming in and coming out of our systems these days. Right? So obviously all of this will definitely have a deep and significant impact on the workloads and the business objectives of the organization. And the agile IT infrastructure will support these applications in many ways. So infrastructure has to be supportive and responsive to the business and dynamic changes. It has to encompass technology trends. And as I said, again, fundamentally, it boils down to how it encompasses the people who are deploying it, the processes which are there in place, and the methodologies that are run in an organization. And in order to have the right or the correct agile infrastructure, there are a few metrics that at CMR we thought of sharing with people in this particular webinar. Is you have to, there's a shift in the performance models away from storage, right? So there's multi-generation architecture, there's immediate or near immediate deployment, and then you also have cloud infrastructure to support all of this process. When we talk about agile infrastructure and data explosion, somewhere when we talk about data, that we cannot go without talking about intelligence, analytics, and cognitive intelligence, and how this really support your IT organization. So when if you see it as a whole, digital transformation augmented with agile infrastructure, augmented with intelligent analytics, gives you business benefits at a whole different degree. As our numbers suggest, based on our research, 66% of organizations have been applying new analytical tools to data. 64% of organizations are using data from new sources and data types, and 7% of organizations are using advanced and predictive analytics. And I'm sure they're using this for some good measure. So it makes a compelling story when we stitch it all together, right? So in order to have the best cognitive experience, the best step forward would be, leading discovery, decision, and engagement, which will lead to new insights, provide bias-free and advise semi-autonomously, and an direct engagement with all the primary stakeholders within the organization. This particular slide, I'm on slide number 12, will give you how cognitive maturity helps on various dimensions of the nature of data that we're talking about. It could be the vision of the organization, the data that we're dealing with, the technology that holds that all together, and the people and process that are there. Typically, as you can see, for instance, when we talk about technology, we need to deploy it. There has to be certain significant adoption, performance gets measured, and then functionality gets approved, right? So, as I said, I would like to wrap it up by saying, as I said in the beginning, while technology, deployment, IT infrastructure, and cognitive intelligence all play a critical role in the successful journey of digital transformation, somewhere our basic policies, regulations, our basic DNA of our organization also play a critical role. So typically what has prevented a lot of organizations, and I'm talking specific to the Indian subcontinent, from truly going for a digital transformation is numbers dictate here. 36 people, not enough people with the right skill sets. So we need to encourage more and more people to have the right skill sets to go for the long distance. Legacy infrastructure again becomes a lacuna for non-agility and in terms of performance. But the most important part, 39% of persons say lack of risk-taking or innovation in culture. I guess that's an area that if more to be spoken about, more to be drilled down, will have a significant bearing in the outcomes of your digital transformation journey. That's it from me. I'm sure you'll have a very engaging presentation from Devanjan going forward. Thanks a lot for joining in for today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosh. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you the next speaker, Mr. Devendran Pandyan, who is a country leader from Channel Technical Sales, IBM India and South Asia. And he will share his insights on the agile infrastructure for digital transformation. I would like to turn the program to you, Mr. Pandyan. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. So I would like to give a bit about the digital transformation, what every organization to look at and how they are going to transform. In this session, we will actually do a slide follow-up on what could be the infrastructure which we need to adopt when we are looking at a digital transformation. So every organization, the clear thing is actually the digital transformation is going to be the key. Whether it is the service what is happening across, whether it is the service what we are doing across the customers, predominantly everybody looking at a digital transformation. So 80% of the CXOs are actually experimenting different business models or thinking to do so. That is one part of the survey. Second is by 2020, 95% of the top 100 enterprise software companies are going to have a cognitive technology. So that is actually clearly coming out from these surveys. Now we look at what are the other changes which are happening. So while we are actually very clear about we need to do the transformation and get into a digital business, there are some 3 parameters we need to look at. So the digital, while we are doing this digital business, we also need to look at business cost optimization and also IT cost optimization. These are the 3 pillars we need to clearly look at. In this scenario, there are a lot of challenges faced by the IT teams in the current scenario. For example, if you look at the data, it's actually exploding and growing exponentially, and the licenses are becoming really complicated. There are a lot of unstructured data growth is happening everywhere. So while all this is happening, when we are looking at the digital transformation, we also need to be really agile in terms of setting up the infrastructure. What do you mean by agility in the infrastructure? We need to adapt to the frequent changes what is happening, which can help in the business requirements. Same way, the entire infra should be highly scalable from X parameter today or X workload today, X plus Y or X plus Z sort of workload in the next 1 year or 2 years. The infrastructure should be highly scalable. And most importantly, like every enterprise solution, we need to have highly available solutions across. So these are the challenges what IT is currently going through. So if you look at the digital journey, is it going to actually completely going away? How we can classify this entire workload? We can actually classify into 3 different categories. One is actually a new type of workload, which actually has a lot of new data structures. It is actually growing faster and it needs to be accessing faster information. So that's the characteristics of a new workload. And our traditional workload that actually continues as it is, but the only thing is the variation there is it actually demands more performance and security. It also demands capacity management and integration. So traditional workloads can be categorized that way. And the third important categorization is actually the system intelligence, where the artificial intelligence or machine learning, deep learning are coming into picture. If you have the categorization of these workloads this way, what could be the fundamental thing which has to be there? First is for the new workloads, the new workload, the platform or the infrastructure what we have should be really flexible enough. Today I might run a X operating system, tomorrow I might move into a different operating system. Today I might run an on-prem, tomorrow I might actually move into a cloud, whichever way you are going to do. Today I might run one particular database system, tomorrow I'm going to change something else. the entire infrastructure should be flexible enough to handle the new workload. That is one key thing for the new workloads. Traditional workload, yes, all these years we were having traditional workloads, core critical system running, specific workloads on that. That has to be really smarter, which means that performance should be there, security should be there, and it actually need to deliver much more compared to the way it was delivering earlier. And system intelligence, the third workload, where you clearly need only high performance. It has to actually start learning from what the data what it is getting and how it is processing that data. So broadly, the digital journey drivers we can classify into 3 different workloads. And coming to this, if you look at actually the center bottom part of the presentation, you will have the conventional data platform, which is where the traditional way we were doing the IT infrastructure for any business, where you had systems of record, which is clearly focused on either an RDBMS or OLTP or structured data with some sort of systems of insight, where actually you provide, you do data warehousing and which has clear structured data, where you do all the transactions. Now the trend is completely changing. There are new data sources are evolving. Like for example, the data comes on from social, mobile data services, from sensors, from locations. You have data coming in from all forms, and it is exploding like anything. When this is actually happening, that's when we can say this is actually the modern data platform which is emerging. So for addressing this, there are multiple operating systems as well as DBs which actually are catering to these new workloads. What are the key characteristics of this new workload, and what should be the client value for it? One, it has to be lower cost, it should be scalable, okay, it should be open source, and there should be less vendor lock-in. And all these workloads are actually clearly born on or designed for the cloud. This is actually the modern data platform which is evolving now. Moving on to the next slide, just to give a quick brief of what is happening on the open source databases. If you actually look at what Gartner is predicting is by 2018, more than 70% actually of the new in-house applications what enterprises are going to develop are going to be developed on open source databases, and almost 50% of them actually will be converted. That's what Gartner is predicting. And if you look at the database popularity, we have listed the top 10, what is their growth or degrowth in the last 3 years. So you can clearly see a lot of open source databases, while the existing traditional databases are continuing where they are remaining flat, but these open source databases are actually growing exponentially. That's the sort of growth what we are having here. Let's just quickly take a pause for a minute here, and I'll open out a poll question. Let's answer that poll question. Can we have the poll questions here? Can you display the poll question here? Please take a minute and just respond on this poll just to get an idea of how much of open source database you are using in your organization, or you're exploring, or you don't know about it. Let's actually answer this poll question. Yeah, you can see the results here. Almost everything is in the same range. Okay. So So now currently we know that this is actually heading this way. New data platform is emerging, and open source database are emerging. What is that IBM as an organization or IBM as a company is doing in this technology space? So we are part of this open power community where we have a lot of other vendors as part of this community. There are closer to 275 odd members cutting across 26 countries. Closer to 2,300 odd ISVs developing Linux on Power. We have actually created a consortium where actually having IBM Power as a central architecture and technology, people can actually develop things. It could be the connect, it could be the software, it could be the GPUs, and all those vendors actually are developing based on the Power architecture. So the next slide actually will give you how many people are there and who are those partners here. Like for example, you have partners from implementation, HPC, and research, where a lot of members are part of that. Then you have software, which actually Google, Ubuntu, and American Megatrends. All these people are there. Same way on the system integrators side, we also have a whole lot of members participating in the system integration. I/O acceleration and storage acceleration, that's where we have actually NVIDIA, Mellanox, and QLogic, and those sort of interconnect vendors who actually develop their solutions around IBM Power. So this actually open power community is clearly created and developed so that actually the open source developments are happening, everything happens on the open power community. And all this is actually clearly meant for the new cognitive workloads which are actually emerging now, and this is actually ideally suited for the big data sort of environments. So what is specifically IBM is doing with IBM Power? So these are actually some of the investments what IBM is doing specifically on the Linux and the open technologies. We have invested over $1 billion actually to do the development on Linux and open technologies. So getting into slightly on the architecture side on the Power 8, if you look at the Power 8 architecture, that it's actually, we have categorized it into 3 different segments. It is catering to 3 different portfolios. Like for example, you have a scale out system, which actually clearly if you have actually want to scale it across multiple servers or a particular workload, then scale out systems will be the ideal fit in. Then the enterprise system, where you actually want to scale within the same system the number of cores or the memory or the I/O connect you want to scale in within the same system. And the third category is actually the Linux cluster systems, which actually clearly targeted towards Linux workload, and we have a HPC or any AI or machine learning or a deep learning sort of workloads is there that is clearly targeted on the LC system. So broader level, these are the 3 classifications. And if you slightly go why this is actually very important for the current workload. The current workload is about larger IOs and throughput. Larger data is coming, larger transactions are happening, data is coming from different sources. So you need to have the platform or the architecture which can actually analyze that and process that data. So this, if you look at this architecture, whether it is large in-memory databases or large virtualized environments, this is clearly actually designed for it. We actually have this particular architecture where the memory bandwidth is actually twice better compared to the competitive platform. So clearly meant for memory intensive workloads, and this is actually going to help in a lot of big data sort of workloads, and also workloads like in-memory workloads like the SAP HANA. So I'm moving on to the next slide. This is actually talking about the workload accelerators. You would have actually, in a high-performance computing environment, you would have heard about a server which is having a GPU, which actually gives in additional processing power, where the processor can offload the workload to the GPU or the FPGA. So if you look at the IBM Power 8, this is actually under the open power with NVIDIA. We have actually the NVIDIA Tesla cards, which actually are operating like an offload engine for it. So whatever application is there, there is actually a processor logic, and some of these workloads where you need additional processing power are getting offloaded to the GPU. So if you look at a open source database or any sort of modern data platform, when you need to do a lot of processing processing, these workload accelerators are going to play significant part in terms of delivering the performance. Just a quick overview on the overall IBM systems Linux portfolio. So if you look at the scale-out systems, you have the LC line, which actually predominantly meant for large cloud and cluster sort of workloads, which is actually the system which actually will have the specifications which are meant only for larger deployments. It will not have multiple IOs and other connects which actually is required for the large enterprise system which can scale internally. This will actually scale cutting across multiple systems. So it clearly is designed for cloud and cluster. The similar way, the L line actually is the enterprise level RAS system. This is predominantly for big data and analytics. Then you have the scale-up system, obviously the enterprise level. So what has happened here is IBM Power Systems predominantly was meant for enterprise systems earlier, and it was running all the core critical applications for large banks, large manufacturing units, large insurance companies across the globe. What is happening is with the level of performance what you get on that, and with the level of security and the RAS features what we have, the same platform is going to be available for these sort of new workloads like a big data or the analytics or the machine learning. So which actually really gives the performance what is required for these workloads to run. Just a quick overview of three different models, like for example, a model called SA22LC for high performance computing. This actually goes in with the NVIDIA NVLink Tesla card, and there is actually an 82LC for big data and 81LC for specifically on the larger workloads. So what is this NVLink? So typically, if you look at the next slide, on the left-hand side, the architecture, what you had is actually a PCI Express by 16-based architecture, where the pipe between the CPU and the GPU was actually delivering a throughput of around 32 Gbps. Between the memory and the CPU was around approximately 77 Gbps. With actually the power rate of the NVLink, you actually have a dedicated NVLink which is actually connecting, if you have multiple GPUs, it is connecting the GPUs, and at the same time it connecting each of these GPUs into the CPUs. Each of these link actually the throughput is around 80 Gbps, which is actually much higher compared to the previous PCI Express based one. So how does this is going to help the customers in the current scenario is, so this is going to actually all your analytics, what you are going to do when you're doing a real-time analytics or any sort of high-performance computing workload you are doing, it's going to deliver 2x to 3x in times performance compared to the existing platforms which are based on PCI Express. This is going to have a huge impact on the new workload, which is actually the artificial intelligence, which is that itself is a separate topic altogether. Within that artificial intelligence umbrella, you have machine learning, which is a subset of it, and then deep learning, which is another subset of it. So, for example, you would have actually gone through Amazon e-shopping or Flipkart and those sort of shopping. Like, for example, if I have gone through a particular mobile model, the machine actually understands intelligently and throws out 2 or 3 options in front of me. Like, for example, one part of things will be, if you are actually looking at this particular mobile, there could be other mobiles you can look at, either based on the same price point or based on the similar specification. That could be one sort of learning what the machine does, and it actually gives you a preference. Or the second thing is, suppose if you are actually buying a particular mobile, it also says people who bought this particular mobile actually also bought this particular scratch guard, this cover, and this charger, and this adapter, like that. So this is nothing but actually a sort of machine learning which actually is operating in the e-commerce market. So not only in the e-commerce, every industry actually needs this AI, ML, and DL going forward. It is actually cutting across industry. Only one characteristic is the platform should be agile enough to understand the change and make the change faster. That's one thing. Second thing is it has to learn faster to understand the algorithms and give predictive results based on this algorithms what it has learned, and also it has to deliver performance with the large amount of data what is getting. So if you look at the entire high performance stack, so there is something called Power AI, which is actually the hardware plus the AI framework. This AI framework is actually with the supporting library and deep learning frameworks are part of this. On top of that, your customer's application or your application is actually can sit on that. So this actually covers the complete plethora of this complete artificial intelligence, which has the framework, library, and the hardware, which actually support enabled with a GPU, which actually gives a much better performance, which is required for processing large amount of data in a short span of time. Now let's quickly look at what are the key characteristics of a modern data platform. For example, modern data platform is extremely parallel. It is about number of transactions you are getting. The data sources are coming from multiple. You are actually getting multiple parallel instructions. It is supposed to be extremely parallel. It cannot actually be done in sequential manner. So hardware platform, when you are actually selecting for this particular architecture, should focus on the number of hardware threads the platform can execute. For example, if you take a Power 8 platform, each and every core can execute up to 8 threads. So if I actually have a 10-core processor, which means that that single processor can execute up to 80 threads at a time. Let's actually take the competition of an Intel-based platform. Typically, Intel, they actually call that as actually hyper-threading. Any Intel core can execute 2 threads at a time. So which means that even if you have a 10-core processor, the 10-core processor can execute only 20 threads at a time, versus the same 10-core processor executing 80 threads at a time. So this is ideally meant and designed for these sort of big data workloads, which is clearly parallel in nature. It's not a sequential data, so whenever the instructions are flowing into the system should be able to process it with the multiple number of threads. The second characteristics is actually multiple data streams. So it is actually the data stream is not one. It actually comes across from different sources. So when you have such a multiple data streams coming in, you need to have a larger cache as well as memory bandwidth, which I actually explained in NVLink also, right? Same way, whether it is GPU or CPU to memory, the memory and cache bandwidth is very critical when you have multiple data streams flowing in. So that's actually clearly 3x times to 4x times more compared to the competitive platforms. And the third characteristics is actually the data size is huge. Okay, so when the data size is huge, you need to have a larger I/O bandwidth, which can actually handle that particular data. And important thing to the key to the business is, as I said, IBM Power is meant for reliability, availability, and serviceability, which we call it as a RAS features, and also security. And it is predominantly running the core critical workloads in large banks, manufacturing, and large customers across the globe. So if you're going to get the same RAS features and security for running your key business, what else you need? So this is clearly an additional thing. So predominantly the 4 characteristics of the platform is actually parallel execution, data flowing in from multiple streams. You have huge amount of data coming in, and it is what is the key to business. These are the 4, and for that, when you are selecting an architecture, you need to focus on all these 4 parameters. How many threads it can actually execute, what is the cache and memory bandwidth, whether it can handle everything, what is the I/O bandwidth for my hardware platform, and also the reliability features. So now let's look at what are the different modern databases available. You would have heard about majority of them. Okay, it could be in memory, it could be NoSQL, it could be open source. You have various of these modern data platforms actually are evolving. So for handling this, what are the important things which is required on the architecture level. First thing is actually you need to have the bandwidth. I said about the memory, cache, and I/O, right? Here actually the number of threads, 4x number of threads compared to the a competitive platform. So basically each and every core can execute 8 threads at a time, whereas the competition can actually do only 2 threads at a time. That's one thing. Second important thing is the memory bandwidth. It is 4x times compared to the x86 pipe. That is also a key differentiator or key requirement for such workloads. And the memory cache and the lower latency, that is also 4x times. On top of all these things, this is actually designed for open power, where all these open source vendors and open source database solutions, everything is actually architected and optimized for. So there are these are some of these big data solutions which are clearly optimized for open power LC servers. You would have heard about MongoDB. If you take MongoDB, more than 2x times compared in terms of price performance over x86, and if you take Redis sort of thing, it is 67% more throughput and at the same time 60% lower cost compared to x86. So these are every benchmark on these open source databases. We have a clear lead, and for you as a customer, the TCO is clearly a value which actually you need to consider. Let's actually take a minute for a quick poll question. Can we have the second poll question here? Okay, we have the results here. So a lot of you are actually interested in exploring that. Yes, we will actually definitely explore together. So let's actually move on to the next slide. Here actually we have just given some examples and references where IBM Power is running with a particular sort of database, like for example with Mongo, with Enterprise DB, with Redis, with Neo. There we have given some of these references where it is running. Specifically, actually, I would take the case which is with India. It is actually IBM Power plus Enterprise DB, which is running on NPCI, which is National Payment Corporation of India. That actually is actually a major breakthrough for us in India with the open source database, and they have actually seen around 2.3x times performance compared to what they were getting compared to an x86 system. That is actually running live right now in NPCI. Same way, we have a lot of references on all these workloads. Let's take a small comparison. I'm just taking a MongoDB. If I'm actually taking a MongoDB running on an IBM Power 82LC system, which is having 20 cores and 128 GB memory, versus a x86 system running 28 cores and 128. If you look at actually the performance, it is 40% more performance per server and 30% lower in hardware cost and maintenance. So if you look at a price per performance, it's approximately 1.68 times better. And it's actually a lower course versus a higher course here. Then moving on to the Enterprise DB, here actually it's approximately 1.8x times overall TPS per dollar, transactions per dollar. It's 60% better. Here we are running an 82 LC 16 core versus a 36 core HP DL390, which is based on Intel. This is actually based on Intel as well. So here also we have significant TCO. So any customer who is actually exploring such a scenario should actually evaluate these options. And the next one actually giving IBM PowerAid and Hortonworks approximately 1.7x times compared to the x86 system. So from an open source database as well as the traditional workloads, you have significant performance improvement that actually clearly is driven by the larger cache what we have, larger memory bandwidth what we have, IO bandwidth what we have. And if you are actually looking at clearly high performance computing or an AI ML sort of workloads with NVIDIA GPU, with the Tesla, this is going to give 2 or 3x times better performance across the board. So moving on to the next slide. So if you are actually looking at a platform on an architecture, okay, you may not be actually moving into a new modern data platform now, or you are in the exploratory phase, or you might actually already have something in the POC. That's one part. Same way, you might be currently only on-prem. You don't have any cloud currently, or any new workloads which are native born on cloud sort of applications right now. But when you are actually we are in a juncture when you are deciding an architecture or a platform now, you should be selecting a platform which actually can cater to all these things. So whether if it is actually a traditional application, whether it is a new big data analytics workloads, or whatever it's going to be a new cloud native applications, the platform what you decide should be able to support that. Say for example, right now I'm actually running only my traditional application. Maybe down the line 1 year later, I might actually move into I might have a new big data or analytics workload, or I might have 1 or 2 new applications which are cloud native, which I am planning to introduce into my infra due to a business need, or one of your line of businesses is asking for a new workload. If you are in a situation like that, the platform what you are investing in today, that platform should be able to support these workloads and also deliver performance on this actually. When you are taking an architecture call, we need to look at all the 3 different digital journey drivers, because you are actually taking a journey where you are transitioning from your business, your regular business into a digital business. When you are doing that, you need to look at the platform and invest in a platform which can actually scale in or scale up or scale out and support all these 3 different types of workloads. So with this, I would like to say thank you, thanks a lot, and over to the moderator.
Thank you very much. So participants, with this, we open it for Q&A interactive session. Should you wish to ask any question, you may use the chat facility to send your questions to all panelists. Alternatively, you may press 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad to ask any audio questions. I would like to hand it over to Mr. Apulak Ghosh. There are a few questions on the chat. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Shoradeep. Thanks a lot. Devon, thank you so much for running through your presentation. It was a lot of insights that I'm sure most of our audience have kind of taken in. There definitely seem to be a lot of questions that we have from the audience. Probably just one to begin from my end, since it's very good to know and very hard to know that the way IBM is focusing on the open source databases. So typically, according to you, what would be the benefits of you're running the open source databases on Power as compared to the traditional Intel x86? Probably if you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, clearly. From an architecture point of view, I actually spoke about the capabilities of the core-to-core performance, what is the I/O and the memory bandwidth. So if you are going to compare that with x86, say for example, any customer who is having some 14, 15 x86 servers which are due for refresh now, and their operating system is actually Linux, then actually these 15 servers can be consolidated in 3 or 4 Power servers. So that is actually the power of the platform, which actually gives a performance equivalent of that. So typically you can actually go take it this way. For the performance, what you are going to get from one IBM Power Core, that should be approximately equal to 3 cores of Intel. That's the core-to-core ratio. So if you're going to get that much of a performance and your number of servers, physical servers are going to reduce, you actually save on the real estate as well as the footprint in hosting into your data center, the power consumption, everything. So that way it's going to be really best TCO or the better TCO for the customers to look at this.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Devendra, I have this question, and I'm reading it out from one of our esteemed audience. His name is Ashwin Shankar. His question is, I mean, amongst many, I'll just probably begin with one. Are blockchain-based systems also part of digital transformation from paper contracts to smart contracts, for example?
Blockchain is just an application. Okay, it can be it's just an application which actually can be run on the Power Platform, and the way it tracks it from end to end. It could be, if you take a logistics industry, from one end where the shipment starts to the other, and you will be able to track it completely digitally. Okay, and it means a lot of minimizing the paperwork in terms of when you're doing an export and import to different countries, shipping it to different countries. The licenses, what you need to have, the documentations, what you need to have. This actually reduces the need of paper, and everything actually goes digital. So it can be run on Power also, correct?
Okay. Hopefully Ashwin is listening to this. I have another question from Ashwin again. So he's asking, do you have similar benchmarks for non-open source databases? We've shared some benchmarks. So do you have
Yes, correct. Yes, correct. So while this one, we actually spoke about the modern data platform, so we actually had the open source database benchmarks, but actually there are other non-open source database benchmarks are already available, that is available in the public website itself, or if in case if they need, they can reach out to any of the IBM resource specifically for this, we can actually share that information with them.
Right. Perfect. Now, let me see. Shrodhi, why don't you, because since we don't have too much time with us, why don't you open it up for the audience in case they would want to ask questions directly to Devendra? That would be very nice. In case people like Ashwin who are still there might want to pose a question directly. Shrodhi, just try to open the line once.
Sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to repeat, should you wish to ask any audio question, you may press 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad. I repeat, it's 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad to ask any questions.
Okay, no problem, Shrodhi. I think I'm sure if there are any questions.
I can see one question from on Bluemix, and the question is also said, are Power 8 servers meant only for on-prem? It is not that. Power 8 actually meant for, it's actually designed for everything. So if you are going to have a cloud sort of environment, it is also suitable and designed for cloud. Okay, and there was a follow-up question on that, whether it is available on something like Bluemix. Actually, Bluemix is a platform where it is nothing but a platform as a service where you can actually develop your mobile application, test it out, and roll it out. That platform actually that runs on actually IBM Power.
Okay, great. I think, Devendra, we have kind of more or less answered all the questions that were there for you. Right. Shrodhi, in case we have no questions from the audience, my request is, once you can probably request from both our end, if there are any questions, they're more than free to ask them. Right. Secondly, there is a feedback form which will pop up once we're through with this particular webinar. I request all the participants who've been part of today's webinar would request to kindly fill them up, send across. That would really help us evaluate ourselves and how to make this webinar more successful going forward, right? So over to you, Shradeep. From my end, it's Apra signing off. Thank you so much for being part of today's webinar. Devendra, any last thoughts that you would want to lend out to your esteemed audience?
None, Aplak. I think we are good to go now.
Great, great. Shradeep, over to you. Just in case there are any questions, we're still there. Otherwise, we would request you to wrap it up.
Sure. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to repeat, should you wish to ask any more questions, please press 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad. Alternatively, you may use the chat facility to send your questions to all panelists. So we'll give you 30 seconds. So we'll wait for 30 seconds before we close the session. So I think we have a question in audio which just popped up. Just bear with me for a moment. Participant who is joining from 97424522828. Please state your name and ask your question. Your line is unmuted.
Yeah, my name is Ashwin. I want to know the dependency of other business partners. For example, we deal with government and with construction companies and so on and so forth. So now these guys aren't very IT savvy. So how do we, kind of transform ourselves and try to, is it really dependent on the entire ecosystem, or we can do something on our own?
Devendra, would you like to take that question up?
Yeah, I will take that question. See, if you look at government, actually the majority of these government organizations, they have actually clearly have got a clear mandate about exploring and moving into open source solutions. Okay, they actually don't want a specific vendor lock-in, and they clearly exploring. So, and if you look at a lot of tender RFPs which has come out recently, majority of them actually is asking for an open source database and open source applications. So yes, the example what I gave about NPCI, that's actually it's an open source application, and it is the Government of India organization. So government is clearly moving in that direction. Probably the other segments or the other industries, they are also actually exploring, because they are looking at the license cost, what they are going to say, what is the total TCO, and the new workloads actually don't have any baggage of actually the old traditional approach. So the new workload actually wants you to explore freely of new things. So if you want to make any changes for the existing infra, then you have to look at multiple things. But if it is going to be a new workload, you can explore in any of those open source available things. So that's where the things are moving in, and we'll soon see a lot of adoption happening in the market.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ashwin. I think you had quite a few questions for Devendra. I think all of them had their own relevance in their own particular area. Thank you so much for asking all these questions. Shradeep, in case we don't have any more questions, I think we will be glad to wrap today's webinar. Once again, a big round of thanks from all our audience, firstly from my end at Cyber Media Research. Devendra, thank you so much for being part of today's webinar. Shradeep, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ghosh. I would like to thank Mr. Pandian and the other panel members who joined us today. Thank you very much all the audience for joining us. Hope you all have spent any useful time. So on behalf of CMR and IBM, we hope it has been useful time spent with us. Thank you. See you next time on our next webinars. Thank you very much.